wind howled like a restless spirit, slamming against the wooden cabin nestled deep in the snow-covered wilderness. Inside, Alex sat alone by the dim glow of a fireplace, nursing his evening coffee. The storm outside was relentless, its icy fingers crawling up the windows, rattling them like a warning. Alex liked the quiet life, or at least he told himself he did. After losing his wife years ago, he had chosen solitude over the pain of human connection. Nights like this, he welcomed the silence. But tonight, something felt off. Then it happened. A faint scratching sound at the door, barely audible over the roaring storm. He froze, gripping his mug tighter. It came again, louder this time. "What in the world?" he muttered, standing cautiously. No one ventured this deep into the woods, especially not in a storm like this. As he approached the door, the sound turned desperate, scratches turning into frantic thuds. With his heart pounding, Alex cracked the door open, only for the freezing wind to whip into the room, carrying with it a pitiful whine. Standing on his porch was a German shepherd, its fur crusted with ice and snow, eyes wide with desperation. "What the—" Alex started, but the dog let out a low, heart-wrenching whimper, pawing weakly at the threshold. Despite his initial hesitation, something about the dog's gaze froze Alex in place. It wasn't just a look of pain, it was almost pleading. All right, he muttered, pulling the door wider. "Come in before you freeze to death." The dog stumbled inside, collapsing onto the wooden floor with a heavy sigh. Alex shut the door quickly, locking out the bitter cold. Alex grabbed a towel and cautiously knelt beside the dog. It flinched at first, but then relaxed, its trust seemingly unshaken. "You've had a rough night, haven't you?" Alex said softly as he dried the dog's fur. Beneath the snow and ice, he noticed scratches and wounds on its paws, likely from trekking through the unforgiving terrain. As he worked, he noticed something odd. The dog wasn't acting like a typical stray. It didn't bolt for food or warmth. Instead, its gaze kept darting to the window, then back to Alex, as if trying to communicate. "What's out there?" Alex asked, half laughing at himself for talking to an animal. The dog let out a short bark, stood up shakily, and trotted to the back door. It turned to look at him, its eyes sharp and focused, then barked again. "Hey, no way," Alex said, shaking his head. "You want me to go out there? You're crazy." But the dog wouldn't stop. It barked louder, pacing back and forth, its urgency growing by the second. As Alex tried to calm the dog, his fingers brushed against its frozen collar. Curiosity piqued, he gently pried it off. Beneath the layers of ice and dirt, he found an engraved metal tag. Squinting, he read the words aloud. "Follow me before midnight." A chill that had nothing to do with the storm ran down his spine. Midnight? It was already 11:15. What kind of message was this? A prank? A coincidence? The dog barked again, snapping Alex out of his thoughts. All right. Alex grabbed his coat and flashlight. "If this gets me killed, I'm blaming you." As Alex stepped into the blizzard, the dog took the lead, moving with a determination that defied its earlier exhaustion. Alex stumbled after it, his flashlight barely cutting through the swirling snow. "Where are you taking me?" he called, but the dog didn't stop. It bounded ahead, barking occasionally, as if urging him to keep up. The storm was deafening, each gust of wind slicing through Alex's layers of clothing. The dog, however, seemed unaffected, its purpose clear. Every few steps, Alex heard faint noises carried by the wind. Were they cries for help, or just his imagination?
The wind screamed through the forest, rattling branches and whipping snow into Alex's face as he struggled to keep up with the German shepherd. His flashlight flickered under the relentless cold, casting fleeting shadows that made the woods seem alive with movement. The dog pressed on, its pace unyielding despite its earlier exhaustion. Alex tripped over a hidden root and barely caught himself, cursing under his breath. "Slow down, will you?" he shouted, but the dog didn't pause. As he stumbled after it, the sound of the storm seemed to shift. Beneath the howling wind, Alex thought he heard something else, a distant muffled cry. He stopped dead, holding his breath to listen. The faint sound came again, clearer this time, It was a voice, a weak, desperate voice. "Help, please." "Hello?" Alex called, his voice almost drowned by the wind. "Is someone out there?" The shepherd barked sharply, snapping Alex back into motion. All right, I'm coming." The terrain grew treacherous as the dog led Alex deeper into the woods. Snow-covered roots snagged his boots, and low-hanging branches clawed at his jacket. The cries for help grew louder, but so did the storm, as if the weather itself were trying to drown out the sound. Suddenly, Alex's foot slipped on an icy patch, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain shot through his knee, but before he could curse his bad luck, the dog returned, nudging him with its nose. Yeah, I'm coming," Alex groaned, pulling himself up. "You're one persistent mutt, I'll give you that." The dog barked again, almost impatiently, before darting ahead. The cries became clearer as they approached a frozen stream, the ice glowing faintly in the weak moonlight. Alex hesitated, his breath fogging up in the cold. The dog didn't. It bounded across the ice with an agility that Alex envied. "Not all of us have 4 legs, you know," he muttered, carefully stepping onto the ice. The surface creaked ominously under his weight. Each step felt like a gamble, the thin layer of ice cracking faintly beneath his boots. Midway across, he heard it, a sharp, gut-wrenching crack. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, freezing in place. The dog turned to bark at him from the far bank, its eyes glinting in the darkness. "I don't suppose you've got a rope or something?" Alex joked, his voice trembling. The ice groaned again as he took another cautious step. Just as he reached the edge, the ice behind him gave way with a deafening crack, plunging a section of the stream into freezing water. Alex fell to his knees, panting. "That was way too close," he muttered, glaring at the dog, who merely wagged its tail before sprinting off again. As they pressed on, the cries for help grew louder, filled with raw desperation. Alex's heart pounded as he scanned the dark woods with his flashlight. He could now make out 2 voices, a woman's frantic pleas and a child's muffled sobs. "Hold on, I'm coming," Alex shouted, his voice shaking with urgency. The dog stopped suddenly, standing rigid with its ears pricked forward. It barked once, sharp and clear, before racing ahead again. Alex followed, his lungs burning from the cold air. The trees thinned out, and through the blinding snow, he saw it, a faint glow of headlights buried under layers of ice and snow. The German shepherd stopped at the edge of a frozen lake, barking furiously. Alex's flashlight beam swept across the surface, revealing the outline of a car submerged under the ice. The faint cries for help were now unmistakable, coming from inside the vehicle. "Oh my God," Alex whispered, his blood turning to ice. He rushed forward, sliding to his knees at the edge of the lake. The headlights flickered weakly beneath the frozen surface, illuminating the terrified faces of a woman and a young child trapped inside. The woman banged on the window, her screams muffled by the thick ice. "Hang on, I'll get you out," Alex shouted, his voice cracking. The dog barked frantically, running circles around him, as if urging him to hurry. The tension peaks as time runs out, and the thin ice threatens to give way beneath him. Alex's heart pounded as he scrambled to his feet, scanning the frozen lake for anything he could use. His flashlight's beam landed on a nearby fallen tree, its thick branches partially buried in the snow. "That'll have to do," he muttered, racing toward it. The dog barked furiously, staying near the edge of the ice, its paws scraping at the frozen surface. Grabbing one of the broken branches, Alex returned to the lake and dropped to his knees. He struck the ice with all his strength, sending shock waves rippling across the surface. The cries from the car grew more frantic. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice echoing across the empty wilderness. The ice resisted at first, but Alex didn't stop. His arms ached. His hands burned in the freezing air, but he kept swinging.
The branch finally broke through, sending shards of ice flying into the air. Freezing water sprayed his face, but he didn't care. The hole he'd made was too small. Alex threw the branch aside and plunged his bare hands into the freezing water, clawing at the ice to widen the opening. Pain shot through his fingers, but he ignored it, driven by the terrified faces staring up at him from below. Inside the car, the woman cradled the sobbing child, her lips blue from the cold. She pounded on the glass, her eyes wide with fear. Alex could see the water rising inside the vehicle, creeping toward their chins. "I'm coming!" he yelled, though he wasn't sure if they could hear him. Finally, the hole was wide enough for him to reach the car. He grabbed the nearest branch again and slammed it against the windshield. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. "Come on," he growled, striking it over and over. The windshield gave way with a deafening crunch, water rushing out in a freezing torrent. The woman screamed, clutching her child tightly. Alex threw the branch aside and reached into the car, pulling at the door handle. It was jammed. "No, no, no!" he shouted, yanking with all his might. As Alex struggled with the door, the German shepherd jumped onto the ice beside him, barking wildly. The dog darted to the other side of the car, scratching at the submerged frame. Alex watched in awe as the dog somehow found an opening, a small crack near the back window, and began digging furiously. "You're a miracle, you know that?" Alex muttered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The dog's effort was enough to weaken the ice further, and with one final pull, Alex managed to wrench the door open. Freezing water poured out as the woman pushed the child toward him. "Take him first," she cried, her voice trembling with panic. Alex grabbed the boy, wrapping him in his jacket and pulling him to safety. The child sobbed against his chest, his small body shivering uncontrollably. "You're okay," Alex whispered. "You're safe now." The dog barked again, as if urging him to hurry. Alex turned back and reached for the woman, who was now nearly submerged. "Come on!" he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her out with a grunt. She collapsed onto the ice, coughing and gasping for air. The ice groaned ominously beneath them. Alex's blood ran cold as he realized the surface was about to give way. "Get up!" he shouted, lifting the woman to her feet. "We have to move!" The dog led the way, barking and guiding them toward solid ground. Alex held the child tightly, half dragging the woman behind him. Each step felt like a gamble, the ice cracking louder with every movement. "Almost there!" he yelled, his breath visible in the freezing air. Just as they reached the edge of the lake, the ice gave a final, deafening crack. Alex turned in time to see the section they'd just crossed collapse into freezing water. They were safe, but just barely. On the shore, Alex collapsed to his knees, cradling the child as the woman threw her arms around both of them, sobbing uncontrollably. "Thank you," she gasped through her tears. "You saved us. You saved us." Alex looked down at the dog, who sat beside him, panting heavily but wagging its tail. "No," Alex said, stroking the shepherd's head. "He saved you." The woman nodded, her eyes filling with gratitude as she looked at the dog. "What's his name?" Alex asked. The woman's face fell, confusion washing over her. "I don't know. He's not ours. He came out of nowhere. He found us." Alex stared at the dog, his mind racing. How had it known? How had it found them in time? Alex pushed the cabin door open with his shoulder, the warm glow of the fireplace spilling into the freezing night. The woman and child stumbled inside, trembling from head to toe. Alex gently laid the boy on the sofa, wrapping him in a heavy blanket before turning to the woman. "You're safe now," he said, his voice hoarse. "Let's get you both warm." The dog followed them inside, shaking snow from its fur before curling up by the fire. The woman sank to the floor beside the boy, holding him close, her tears flowing freely now that the ordeal was over. "I thought we were going to die out there," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We skidded off the road hours ago. The car sank so fast. If it weren't for you—" She stopped, glancing at the dog. "For him." Alex nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the shepherd. The dog had already closed its eyes, its chest rising and falling in the steady breaths as if it had completed its mission. Later that night, as the storm finally began to die down, Alex sat by the fire with a steaming mug of tea. The child was fast asleep, his tiny hands clutching the edge of the blanket, while the woman rested against the sofa, her exhaustion finally overtaking her. The dog lay at Alex's feet, staring up at him with those same intense, knowing eyes. Alex leaned down, stroking its head. "Who are you, huh?" he murmured. "You're not just any stray, are you?" The dog thumped its tail once but didn't move. Something nagged at Alex's mind, the engraved tag. He pulled the collar from his pocket, turning it over in his hands. The words, "Follow me before midnight," glinted faintly in the firelight. But then, as he stared at it, the engraving seemed to shimmer. Alex blinked, holding it closer. The message was changing. Now it read, "Thank you." Alex's heart skipped a beat. He looked down at the dog, but it had closed its eyes again, peaceful and still. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the frosted windows, casting a golden glow across the cabin. Alex stirred from his chair, his body aching from the night's events. The woman and child were still asleep on the sofa. He looked around for the dog, expecting to find it curled by the fire, but the spot was empty. "Max?" he called instinctively, though he didn't know why the name had come to him. He checked the kitchen, the porch, even the woods outside, but the dog was gone. Fresh paw prints in the snow led away from the cabin, disappearing into the trees. Alex stood there for a long moment, the cold air biting at his skin. A strange sense of loss settled over him, though he couldn't explain why. Back inside, the woman stirred as Alex entered. "The dog, where is he?" she asked groggily, glancing around. "He's gone," Alex replied quietly, sitting down across from her. The woman frowned, confusion etched on her face. "But how did he know? How did he find you? Find us?" Alex shook his head. "I don't know, but he did." He hesitated, then handed her the collar. "This was his. Look at it." She took it, her eyes widening as she read the engraving. "What does it mean?" Alex shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Maybe he wasn't just a dog. Maybe he was something more. The woman looked up at him, tears filling her eyes. "Whatever he was, he saved my son's life. He saved both of us." Alex nodded, leaning back in his chair as he stared into the fire. He thought about the dog's eyes, how they seemed to hold an intelligence far beyond what he'd ever seen in any animal. Perhaps some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Days later, as Alex cleared the snow from his cabin's porch, he paused to take in the tranquil forest. The storm had passed, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. A faint bark echoed through the trees, distant yet clear. Alex's head snapped up, but the woods were empty. For a moment he thought he saw a shadow moving between the trees, a familiar shape, strong and sure. But when he blinked, it was gone. Smiling to himself, Alex returned to his work, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He would never forget that frozen night, the desperate cries for help, or the dog that appeared out of nowhere to save them. Somehow he knew that wherever the dog was, it was watching over them still.